A failed hero turns into a monster after getting attacked by a parasite, but pretends to be normal. Kafka lives in a world where monsters named Kaijus are a constant threat to humanity. But mankind has learned to live with this issue, and have created a special force to deal with these monsters. One day another kaiju appears out of nowhere from the sea and attacks the port, threatening the city with floods, while an emergency announcement is released for people to get in the underground shelters for their safety. The monster turns out to be a 60-meter-tall behemoth who causes destruction in the entire city as he walks through the building. While the people of the area could do nothing but watch helplessly, the government immediately sends in the defense force who surround the kaiju from all sides and shoot missiles at it after making sure the area has been evacuated. This entire sequence is televised all over the country, where people watch it online and wonder which division will fight the monster this time. It's the special forces from the 3rd Division that get mobilized this time, and a couple of soldiers emerge from the chopper with special weapons and dive down on the nearby buildings. The kaiju continues to destroy anything that comes in his way. But now the 3rd Division lays down suppressing fire, distracting the monster and injuring it, while some of them run directly at the beast, shooting at it while dodging its deadly attacks with ease. Taking advantage of this distraction, their team leader, who was ready with a hand cannon, shoots a blast at the kaiju, hitting it directly in the heart, taking its life in an instant. The kaiju bubbles up and explodes into a bloody mess, while the team leader watches as blood falls all around her. Later that day, Kafka looks at the mess through binoculars while eating his lunch, thinking about how much work they will have to do to clean everything up. Meanwhile, the citizens are cheering for the 3rd Division as they eliminated the kaiju with 0 casualties and in a very small amount of time. Kafka arrived at the location, looking at the giant crowd as they cheer for the defense group while no one pays any attention to him as he walks past them towards the dead monster. This is because he is a cleaner whose job begins after the battles are over and they do all the dirty work, while the people who create all this mess are celebrated as heroes. He climbs on top of the carcass and starts dissecting the beast into smaller pieces to clean everything up, while a drone comes over to collect some of the samples. He asks his fellow mates to get him a heated chainsaw, when he notices that one of the newbies was trying to hoist up the intestine of the monster, which is very dangerous. He shouts at the man to back off immediately, but it was too late as the intestine ends up bursting, and the man ends up getting hurt in the process. Kafka immediately comes down and runs towards him and applies first aid as he has seen these injuries before and knows how to deal with them. He then looks at the remaining carcass and wonders about how the hell are they going to clean everything within a week. But before he could do anything, his supervisor tells him that he is needed to attend a different part of the kaiju, which turns out to be the intestines, which is the most dangerous and dirty part of the job. Regardless of how much he hates this work, Kafka gives his all and dives headfirst into the intestines to clean it up. Later that night, he returns back to his room, which is pretty dirty for a guy whose entire job is cleaning things up. He tries to get the smell of the intestines out of his nose, but after failing to do so, he notices the program on the TV showing the leader of the 3rd Division known as Mina, who is so incredibly talented that just at the age of 27, not only did she become the captain of her division, but has also slayed close to 100 Kaijus. This makes Kafka remember his past, as it turns out that Mina and him were childhood friends who once made a promise to each other that they will eliminate the Kaijus from the earth as they overlook the death and destruction caused by them. He snaps back to reality as the reporter claims that her popularity has made her a very strong candidate to become a future commander of the defense forces. He shuts the television as it was getting too depressing, but he reminds himself that cleaning is also a very important job, and because of his job, he is able to live in a decent apartment and eat whatever he wants to eat. The next morning, he heads back to work when his colleagues call him over to introduce a new part-time student that is going to intern with them. He tells Kafka that this kid is named Ichai and has the dream of becoming the member of the defense force, which is coincidentally the same dream that Kafka had when he was younger, but he eventually gave up on his dream and is now a veteran in the cleaning industry. Kafka turns around embarrassed and starts shuffling through his locker, when Ichai asks why did he abandon his dream. Kafka replies that he tried his best, but there is always someone that will be better and one step ahead, and also claims that Ichai will understand that as he grows older. To his surprise, Ichai straight up tells him that he will never give up on his dream and moves away to get changed, while Kafka thinks about how he would have looked bad no matter how he replied to that question. Later that day, they get back to the site and the supervisor starts assigning them their duties for the day. and puts Ikai in the group to clean the intestines, which makes Kafka happy for a moment, as this will teach Ikai how difficult their job is. But the supervisor tells Kafka that he will also be working on the intestines, as he is the best at that job. Kafka cries at his bad fortune but immediately gets to work, while the supervisor tells Ikai that Kafka complains a lot, but he is an excellent worker, and that he would have made an excellent officer if he was able to clear the exam. Later that day, they all have their lunch break, where Ikai has totally lost his appetite, which makes Kafka happy, but he had it just as bad and tries not to puke. He notices that Ikai is not eating anything, so he throws a vitamin drink at his face and tells him to drink it, while also offering him a pair of nose plugs to keep out the stench. Ikai refuses to follow his advice, but Kafka ends up forcing him to do as he says. Later that day, everyone finishes up their work and leaves, while Kafka does one final check. Noticing that the worst parts have been cleaned, Ikai arrives behind him and thanks him for helping him throughout the day, as without him, the day would have been much harder. Moreover, he tells Kafka that the age limit for the Defense Force exams have been relaxed to 33 years, and even though it is none of his business, he thinks that Kafka should try reappearing in the exam. After that, Ikai begins leaving, but Kafka stops him to say that he is a good kid, embarrassing Ikai. But suddenly a kaiju appears right behind him from the ground, and would have killed Ikai, if not for Kafka, who risked his life to push him out of the way. They both fall over to the ground, injured, when Ikai tries to get up, but is swatted aside by the monster. Kafka shouts at him to run away as fast as possible and call the defense force, but Ikai refuses to leave him alone. Kafka tells him that he can never be in the force if he dies here, which convinces Ikai to call for help, while Kafka grabs a rod and with a smile on his face distracts the monster while running away. He runs through the deserted streets littered with broken buildings from the last attack, while the kaiju follows at full speed and would have killed him, but Kafka enters a narrow doorway where the kaiju is unable to follow. Kafka runs straight ahead without looking back and jumps out of the window, getting slashed on his face, when he suddenly remembers how Mina was sad because a cat she knew died in the attack. But Kafka tries to cheer her up, and later, they both make a promise with each other to join the defense forces together and eliminate all the kaijus from the face of the earth. He snaps back to reality and wonders where it all went wrong, while the monster starts gaining up on him. Kafka decides to take a stand and makes a plan to attack the legs, but the kaiju is way too fast and strikes at him before he could react, throwing up in the air as his entire life flashes in front of him. He falls to the ground, while the kaiju smashes his leg with its hand, leaving Kafka no choice but to accept his fate and die. Just as the kaiju was about to delete Kafka from this planet, Ikai arrives out of nowhere with an iron rod and hits it in the face, saving Kafka's life. Kafka shouts at him to run away, but Ikai claims that he has notified the defense group already, and claims that he could never become an officer if he can't even save someone's life. The kaiju starts attacking the young man, while Kafka wonders why the hell is he so weak and useless. Just as the kaiju was about to end both Kafka and Ikai's life, a white tiger appears out of nowhere and starts attacking the monster, causing it to explode and die on the spot. Suddenly, Kafka hears Mina's voice as she assigns her teammates different roles, telling them to secure the perimeter and take care of the injured people, while she searches the area for any other monsters. Kafka ends up losing consciousness and wakes up in the hospital at night, where he thinks about how Mina has achieved her goal and reached at a position where Kafka can never even think to follow her. He was feeling miserable when Ikai calls his name, and he realizes that he is not alone. Ikai thanks him for saving his life and telling him to run away, before claiming that he thinks Kafka should really try to be a defense force officer, as he would be really good at that job. Kafka thinks about it, and with a new sense of inspiration, he decides to appear in the next exam for the defense force when he suddenly notices something weird flying around. Before he could scream about the kaiju in his compartment, the monster rushes in and lodges himself deep into his throat, muffling his screams as Ikai realizes that something is wrong and rushes to check up on him. To his absolute horror, Kafka looks at himself in the window, only to realize that he has been turned into a kaiju himself. He screams at Ikai that he is Kafka, while Ikai is too stunned to say a word, but an old man from the hospital spots them, and immediately starts calling the defense forces, while Kafka worries about how to save his life. The defense forces are immediately alerted, and Mina assembles a team of kaiju hunters, while an alert is sounded for everyone to stay indoors and lock their doors, as a small kaiju has been sighted. Back at the hospital, Ikai can't believe what he is witnessing and wonders whether Kafka got devoured by a kaiju. But it becomes immediately apparent that the kaiju is none other than Kafka. The old man who saw everything starts freaking out, while Ikai tells Kafka that they need to make the old guy understand that they will not harm him. To do this, Kafka decides to try and smile, but the old man gets a heart attack just looking at his hideous face and lies down on the ground, shaking with fear. Kafka quickly goes over to check whether the old hag is okay, but to his surprise he is so strong that he breaks the wall of the room just by touching it. He gets scared himself and realizes that he is totally becoming a kaiju. This arouses the other patients who come over to check, only to be scared by Kafka in his hideous monster form. Ikai tells Kafka that they don't have a lot of time as the defense forces must be on their way to the hospital, so they both decide to flee the scene. Kafka immediately heads out to the window and tries to open it. Unfortunately, because of his strength, he completely destroys the window in the process. He gets really impressed by his own strength, but Ikai tells him this is not the time for that and he jumps out the window. Kafka tries to jump out as well, but his jump is so strong that he falls somewhere far away. Ikai starts running down the street to try and find Kafka, when he suddenly spots him following him down the street. To his horror, Kafka doesn't even look like the normal kaiju now and has gotten even uglier with weird tentacles coming out of his body. Ikai asks whether he knows how to control them, but he claims that he can't control anything. Just then his tongue shoots out of his mouth and catches a bird before eating it alive, which really impresses Kafka as he always wanted to be Venom. But Ikai finds it disgusting and tells him to get a hold of himself. Somehow, he manages to revert back to the normal kaiju form and they start running to find a place to hide when Kafka tells Ikai that he really wants to pee. Ikai tells him to hold it in as they don't have the time. But Kafka is unable to hold it and ends up peeing out of his chest. This really embarrasses Kafka, who realizes that he is never going to get married and will die a virgin if anyone gets to know about it. Ikai tells him that they have other stuff to worry about and tries to drag him. Kafka stays on the ground and asks Ikai whether he thinks he can join the defense force even now. Ikai immediately shakes his head, claiming it's impossible as they will kill him on sight. Kafka starts going through a midlife crisis, realizing that his dream will always stay a dream and that he can never catch up to Mina. Ikai ends up finding an abandoned construction site and tells Kafka that they should be safe here if they hide. But just then Kafka gets a weird feeling about something coming from below the ground, and suddenly there is a huge explosion on the other side of the city. Ikai tells him that this is lucky for them as now the defense forces will have to deal with the other explosion first, giving them extra time to hide and figure this out. It turns out that another kaiju has emerged from the ground, completely destroying a house, trapping a woman while her daughter cries as she tries to free her from the fallen debris. The mother tells her to run away, but the child is adamant and tries to move the items trapping her mother but fails to do anything. Just then, the kaiju appears behind them and breaks through the remaining wall to claim its food. But just as it opens its mouth to devour the poor girl, Kafka appears out of nowhere and punches him straight in the face, blasting it away. He surprises even himself with his power, but immediately turns his attention towards the little girl, asking whether she is okay. The girl starts crying out of fear, so he tries to lighten up the mood by making funny faces, but it all goes to waste, as his ugly face can make even Donald Trump cry. Thankfully, Ikai comes to save the day, and comforts the girl while Kafka removes the fallen debris from her mother. Ikai quickly checks on the mother, and thankfully realizes that she is still alive and is just unconscious right now. Before they can feel completely safe though, the kaiju arrives once again, looking uglier than ever to claim its prey. Kafka tells Ikai to take the mother and the child to safety while he deals with the monster. Ikai asks what is he planning to do, and Kafka replies that he is going to punch the monster as hard as possible. Hoping for the best, Ikai immediately runs away with the victims, while Kafka charges his punch that start glowing with electricity, and delivers an uppercut so strong that it rocks the monster completely, blasting it in the air as it completely explodes into nothingness. Kafka is beyond shocked as a bloody rain starts as the remains of the monster falls to the ground. While hiding behind cover, Ikai asks whether Kafka is still in control of his body, and he claims that it's alright and everything is fine. He walks up to the little girl, who hides behind Ikai, and tells her that she doesn't have to worry anymore as she is safe, and soon the defense forces will arrive to help her. Ikai tells Kafka that he has called an ambulance and urges him that they should leave before anyone arrives. Kafka, however, was still stuck on the dream about becoming a defense force member and standing alongside Mina as an equal. He turns towards Ikai and removes his face mask before telling him that his dream about becoming a defense force member is still alive and he will give the exam. Later that night, Mina arrives with her team, only to find the kaiju already eliminated. She is unable to understand who can destroy a big monster like that, but turns around to comfort the little girl, telling her not to worry as she will destroy every single kaiju. The little girl nods, but tells her to spare the good kaiju who saved her and her mother from the monster. This really surprises her, but she doesn't say anything about it. Meanwhile, Kafka returns back to normal, and alongside Ikai they return back to the hospital, lying to the other patients that they ended up hiding after the kaiju appeared in the room, but are completely safe. 3 months pass by after that without much incident, during which Kafka learns how to better control his powers. But the media is still looking for Kafka's kaiju form, which they have named Kaiju no 8, who is the only kaiju who was able to escape from the defense force. Ikai watches this news from the cleaning office, when another senior hands him some mail, which turns out to be the results for the defense force exams. He checks his results, only to see that he has passed the first round and needs to appear for the second one. The senior hands him another envelope containing Kafka's results and asks him to take it to him, as Kafka is on the site, cleaning a body up. Ikai takes the results and starts walking, but checks it on the way, only to see that Kafka has passed as well. He takes the results to the site, where Kafka is having lunch atop the body in his kaiju form. Ikai immediately dropkicks him, claiming that the defense force will exterminate him on sight if they saw him, and Kafka apologizes, claiming that he still ends up slipping up once in a while. After rubbing his face, he asks Ikai whether he is fine now, but he still has his fangs, and Ikai shouts at him to quickly take care of it and shouts at him for being so careless, as he is all over the news. Kafka finally reverts back to normal, and Ikai hands him his results, which he looks at and is glad. But Ikai asks why isn't he happier. Kafka then explains that he always passes the first round but fails in the second. He then tries to open a bottle, but ends up crushing it completely as he transforms into the monster, which makes Ikai tell him that he shouldn't give the exam, but Kafka begs him to not abandon him, and Ikai agrees before leaving. 10 days later, they head to the exam stadium, which is huge and crawling with security. They look around at all the different examinees when a blonde girl heads over to them and asks Kafka to move his van somewhere else as she wants to park there. When Kafka refuses, she takes her overcoat out and uses her special power to literally grab and throw the van aside like a toy. This really shocks Ikai, who asks about her identity, and she claims that she is examinee number 2016, and her favorite pastime is to kill a kaiju. She then moves towards Kafka menacingly and sniffs him before asking why the hell does he smell like a kaiju. This really scares him, as he wonders how to escape this predicament without blowing his cover and getting killed. The girl introduces herself as Kiko, who seems to be pretty rich, and talks down to Ikai about how they should have simply given her the parking space. Just then, to their surprise, Kafka walks up to the flipped van and puts it back up by picking it like a toy. This really shocks Kiko, who wonders whether this guy also has a special suit like her. He tells her not to scratch the van as it is company property, but before he could take the space back, her butler rolls up in the G-Wagon, taking the parking space all for himself. Kafka gets mad at this, but he has no other options left, while Kiko starts walking away with her butler and her guards, showing how much of a baller she is. Kafka was ranting about her when he noticed that Ikai looks super mad. He knows that Kafka used his kaiju powers and reminds him that if anyone saw it, Kafka would be killed and Ikai would be imprisoned as well. Kafka tries to defend himself and claims that he was being smart about it and only transformed his hands to pick the van up. But Ikai is not in the mood of hearing anything and tells Kafka that if he uses his powers for no reason once again, he will send him back home. Meanwhile, inside the headquarters, the members of the defense force take a look at all the new talent that they have got. They realize that this batch looks very promising, as students from the best universities are taking part to become field agents this time. They notice that some of the talent surpasses the others, like the green-haired boy with the calm attitude named Izu, the short yellow-haired guy called Aoe, and the red-haired knucklehead called Furu. But even after all of them, the most promising of these students are Kiko, who is only 16 years old, but graduated from California's best university after skipping a lot of grades because of her innate talent. Everyone's eyes seem to be at her, as she walks up to Kafka and asks whether he even knows who she is or how strong she is. Kafka is a dumbass who doesn't know anything but ends up challenging her. Both Ikai and Kafka discuss a game plan for the exam, as none of them are particularly good at the written tests, so they need to score as many marks as possible in the physical exam. The exam starts, and Kafka, who thought it would be a cakewalk for him considering he does hard physical labor every single day, finally realizes why people hate working out, as he is forced to do soldier crawls, pull-ups, running circuits, and etc., which totally drains him out, and he falls to the ground exhausted by the end of it. The results arrive, and he only gets a measly 219 rank out of 225 examinees, making him bottom of the barrel. Meanwhile, Kiko walks up to him and shows him that she got rank 5 and asks whether he still wants to keep his bet. He tells her that he will never back down against a spoiled brat, which pisses her bodyguards out, and they beat the shit out of him immediately. Later, they all head towards the next phase of the exam, which Kafka is very excited about because Ikai told him that phase 2 of the exam has been cleaning and disposing of kaiju bodies for the last 2 years continuously. Soon, the vice captain of the 3rd Division arrives in front of them styling a bowl-cut hairstyle and introduces himself as Hoshina. He tells them that the next part of the exam is going to be very fun, and opens a gate behind him. Kafka watches with eager eyes as he waits for the announcement to wear kaiju disposal suits and clean some bodies. But to his absolute horror, the next test turns out to be kaiju elimination. He looks at Ikai annoyed, but Ikai claims that they must have changed it this year recently. Hoshina explains how the test is going to operate, while one of the Kaijus runs up at him from behind, scaring Kafka, who falls to the ground. But before it could reach Hoshina, the barriers come down and blocks him, while the guards aim their guns at the monster, ready to shoot. Kiko starts laughing at Kafka for being such a coward and moves inside. They are taken inside a room where they are given a special suit that all kaiju hunters wear. They all start putting the suits on, while Hoshina explains that this suit is their best weapon against the monsters, as it is made by the materials obtained from a dead kaiju. It also has a special property of boosting the strength of the person wearing it, which is very important in a combat situation. Ikai puts his suit on, and to his surprise, the suit immediately gets fitted to each and every muscle of his body, as if it was the venom. Hoshina announces that the suit can take out the latent power of a person known as the combat power, which shows them how much strength they have and how synchronized they are with the suits. He announces some of the best numbers of this batch, and Ikai is the first one with 8% combat power, Izu with 18%, Aoi with 15%, and Furu with 14% combat power. Hoshina tells them not to worry, as even after rigorous training, it is only around 20%, and usually they are lucky only to get one student that has over 10% combat power. Suddenly, the girl wearing the glasses gets shocked and tells Hoshina that Kiko has 46% combat power. This really surprises Hoshina, as he realizes she is already on the level of a platoon leader right now, and has set a record for having the highest combat power that they have ever seen in a newbie. Ikai seems to be bothered by his low power, but Hoshina tells him not to worry, as even 8% is impressive. Suddenly, the Four Eyes claim that Kafka has 0% combat power. This totally cracks Hoshina up, as he watches Kafka trying his hardest to draw out any combat powers. He starts rolling on the floor laughing, asking Kafka whether he has constipation. Kiko seems to be annoyed, as she wants to see the power Kafka showed her in the parking lot. But there is no time for it, as the final test starts. They all stand atop a ridge, while Hoshina tells them that these Kaijus have killed over 16 people last year, but were captured alive as they wanted to train the newbies with it. He tells them to fight them with all they have got, while the drone camera will follow them. And if anyone gets seriously injured or looks like they can't continue, the lab will deploy their shield, and they will immediately fail the test. The test starts, and all the participants jump into the area, while Kiko shows them how it's done as she jumps up to a building and starts running on it to overtake everyone. She runs around the area and spots a kaiju sitting out in the open, which she blasts to shreds without even stopping, and moves on to the next area. She jumps on a building and kills another kaiju that 2 trainees were fighting and keeps running, while Kafka tells Ikai to keep up as they will fall behind. Ikai looks back and tells Kafka that he is the one lagging, but Kafka tells him that without the power of the suit, the guns are really heavy and hard to operate. Ikai asks what should they do as they clearly don't have much firepower to match the stronger participants. Just then, Hoshina announces that the captain of the 3rd Division, Mina, will also be watching the exam. This reminds him of the promise he made to her all those years ago, and he decides to keep trying no matter what. He tells Ikai that they are being followed by drones individually, which means that apart from killing kaiju, the force is also looking for adaptability and teamwork, which they can show by being good supports. He throws away his rifle and takes out his handgun and starts running towards the action. He finds Izu's group struggling to kill a kaiju when suddenly Kafka notices the hooves on its fingers. This reminds him that he has cleaned and disposed of this kaiju before and knows its weaknesses. He immediately takes out his flashbang and decides to play some CSGO as he throws the grenade without warning his teammates. The flashbang explodes, and it immediately causes a lot of pain to the monster and stuns it. Kafka explains that this kaiju can't see well, but has excellent hearing. He then turns towards Izu's group, who is also confused, and tells them to target its belly as it is the weak spot of this monster. Izu seems a bit skeptical, but follows the advice and shoots it down in the belly, killing it immediately. He thanks Kafka for his help, who starts running towards the other end to find some more action, when suddenly another kaiju emerges and hits him square in the body, injuring him as he falls down to the ground. While the 4 eyes in the lab tells Hoshina that Kafka's internal organs have been damaged and he has multiple fractures, Hoshina tells him to ready the shield, but Kafka is not ready to give up as he tries his best to get up and face the beast. The kaiju runs up to him and gets ready to finish him off, when suddenly it gets shot at and is destroyed immediately. The shooter turns out to be Kiko, who tells him that she wants to see his true strength and walks away. Ikai immediately goes near Kafka, who realizes that his leg is completely fractured. Hoshina tells him that his vitals are damaged and that he should drop out of the test for his own safety. But Kafka is not done yet and manages to somehow stand up as he thinks about how everyone else always surpasses him. He screams that he is not going to lose this time, and to everyone's surprise, his combat power goes up by 0.01%, which makes them realize that maybe this guy can still pull it off. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe for part 3. And make sure to check out this brand new anime about the strongest hero who pretends to be normal to live a quiet life.